Hello and welcome to another episode of Fast Forward, a podcast from QSR Magazine where we talk to the founders, innovators, and entrepreneurs behind some of the world's most exciting fast casual restaurant concepts. My name is Sam Oches. I'm the editor of QSR and the editorial director of Food News Media. Today, I'm sharing a conversation with Donna Lee and Zach Flanzman, the partners behind the Chicago-based fast casual concept Brown Bag Seafood Company. Now, seafood has had sort of an interesting history. Of course, on the quick service side of things, you have brands like Long John Silver's and Captain D's that have grown to more of a national status. But beyond that, seafood has remained kind of a niche category. It's really not as popular with Americans as something like burgers and sandwiches and pizza, but fast casual has really helped to put seafood back on the map as this very viable dine-out option. You have brands all across the country popping up that are serving seafood in more creative fashions. Of course, seafood historically has been something where you flash fry it, you've got sort of deep fried shrimp, but now fast casual seafood joints are doing much more creative things. They're actually really leaning into sort of the nutritional and health profiles of seafood. They're using more bold, adventurous flavors and helping to educate Americans on some of the finer points of seafood flavors and helping to educate us on, what is exactly possible with seafood. Brown Bag is absolutely one of those companies. Donna Lee founded this brand back in 2014. She opened up the first Brown Bag. It has since grown to 6 locations, and Zach Flanzman, who joins us for the conversation, he came into the business a couple years after Donna Lee had kind of built that foundation. But what she's trying to do, she says, as you hear from the conversation, that she had a desire to open up her own restaurant company and do something that was really built around how she was eating at the time, which was more health-oriented and more seafood-focused. And of course, in Chicago in particular, you really didn't have many options in that regard. There were really no fast, fresh seafood options like Brown Bag at the time. And so she dove into it and started this company and now has really entrenched it around the downtown Chicago area. So earlier this year, I sat down with Donna and Zach in their office, which was many floors up above the Revival Food Hall, as we reference in this conversation, which was also the destination for their second location. And I wanted to just hear from them not only the story behind how Donna and Zach have built Brown Bag into now this 6-unit success story, but also just how do you build a fresh seafood supply chain in a city like Chicago? How do you educate local customers on what is possible in terms of flavor and quality with seafood? So we get to all of that and more, but I started by asking Donna a little bit more about how she got into the restaurant industry and why she wanted to open her own seafood fast casual restaurant.
I was 16. I was a hostess at Blind Faith Cafe in Evanston, and honestly, just getting hooked on service at that age just kept me in it. And so I went from that was casual full service to working in restaurants through college and started working for a few fine dining operators in Chicago. And once I had my fill of fine dining, I realized I was very interested in fast casual. I went to interview someone at Noodles & Company and just have a chat with him. He was a district manager of the Chicago suburban area, and I sat down with him and asked him a bunch of questions about getting into the industry and my desire to be an entrepreneur. And he said to me, the only way that you're really going to know about this industry is if you do it. Yeah. And so lo and behold, I became a GM for Noodles & Company.
You did that always knowing that at the other side of that, you might launch your own thing.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep. So I spent 4 years there. And then after Noodles, I went to a job that was a little bit more 9 to 5-ish, but still very connected to the industry, worked for a publication, and met a bunch of restaurateurs in Chicago, which was great from just an industry connection and, knowing once I got on the other side and was the entrepreneur who I could talk shop with.
Sure.
So did that. And then, all the while building a business plan and talking to friends and family, looking for real estate. That took about a year, and got very frustrated with Chicago real estate for a while.
I can imagine.
And was very dedicated to opening in the Loop in Chicago. And found a spot that I circled back to after having rejected it the first time around, which is just east of the Loop, right over by Millennium Park and Maggie Daly Park, and that was brown bag number 1.
Gotcha. So this is a multi-year process of getting to this point where you finally opened. I mean, that requires a remarkable amount of patience, because I think a lot of people, especially restaurant operators in this industry, where you sort of romanticize an idea and you just think, I could open a restaurant. And then you make a bad decision, you get a bad lease and jump into it. You were very calculated, it seems like, and very patient. And I can imagine, was that difficult for you to do that?
The real estate piece was super frustrating. Yeah. But at the same time, it's like you're thinking about all of these things and you're trying to figure out how to think about scaling what you do. And I don't even mean scaling into multiple units. I mean scaling just like, well, great, I can, panko crust fish and shrimp really well. That's great. But, how do I do that in volume? Right. So there was a lot of thought that I had to go through that. And I remember being in my apartment and testing for friends and, having little cards and feedback and stuff. So there's a lot to do at the same time.
And was a seafood fast casual the concept always? I mean, was that the idea in your mind that you knew you wanted to open?
Yep. Pretty clear on that. I have actually a barf bag from an airplane that I wrote the menu on, and I still have it today.
Hopefully not used.
And it doesn't look all that different from what it's turned out to be. So
you just had to get up in the sky to kind of get some inspiration.
Apparently.
So you open store number 1. It's this culmination of a long, long process, a lot of work. Was it an immediate success?
It felt like it, because it felt like the doors were being knocked down, and we opened in May, and we were headed right into the summer, which I think was a huge blessing. And I suppose it felt that way because the operations weren't ironed out, right? When you first opened the door, I mean, I can't even tell you how days, really week 1 felt. It was like we were running out of fish and there were delivery drivers coming in, and, the machine is just not well oiled for so long. And then, we adjusted, but it certainly felt busy out of the gate. Our customers in that particular area are very much like business and professional. There's some residential and there's some tourism, but the meat of it is at lunchtime. And it was just great to see that traffic out of the gate on day 1.
So you did have customers. I mean, a lot of people, I think, they sort of build up this idea of what it's going to be. And even if you do have decent traffic, it can seem underwhelming. Maybe you had this idea of something much bigger, a lot more people coming through your doors. Were you ever disappointed, or
no,
you always felt good about it?
Mm-hmm.
That's great. So that means you had an idea. I mean, you really landed on an idea that I think people wanted and craved.
Thank goodness.
Oh boy, that would have been bad if not. So Zach, at what point did you enter the picture?
You still have a few years, really.
Okay. Should we rewind?
Well, I guess to fill in the gap. So Donna opens Randolph, number 1, and churns away for really, 2.5 years there in isolation, oiling the machine that is producing seafood at a high volume. And then she opened Revival Food Hall. So I don't know, Donna, maybe you can tell that brief story about how you got involved there, and then I kind of jump in after that.
Yeah.
Sure. So I don't know if your listeners are familiar with Revival Food Hall, but...
Well, if they've read QSR, I hope so. We've written a bit about it, and we're currently 17 stories above it right now. It's an incredible food hall in Chicago. I guess one of the first real food halls in the city, right? Or at least when food halls started to take off. Yeah.
Right. It was
when
the
food
first
halls
one.
started to be called food halls instead of food courts.
Yeah, right, because there's a couple others in the city, but I don't think they had that sort of, veneer of food halls that they have now.
So I knew and know the management company 16 on Center, who handles Revival, and at the time they were very committed to curating a group of restaurant operators who were either had at least 1 in place or 2 in place, but they didn't want it to be national tenants. And so the idea was to curate a hall where it was Chicago natives, independent operators who had 1 or 2 units, and kind of best in class from a conceptual standpoint.
Yep.
And so, they wanted to curate a hall that had the best pizza and the best sandwiches and the best seafood and the best ramen.
But also with some familiarity in the city, right? Some like names and personalities people know.
For sure.
Yeah.
And so they approached us, and I still remember one of these days that I was sitting out on the patio at Brown Bag at the time, and it's like, when you're sitting out on the patio and it's a summer day and, you're eating fresh fish, it's just like, this is exactly how it's supposed to feel.
Yeah.
And so we talked about getting a place in Revival, and that was number 2.
Great. And opening in a food hall, was that drastically different than opening your own shop?
Drastically.
What were some lessons you learned about that you hadn't known
I'm
yet?
still learning lessons. I think that one of the tougher things is that you're not really the final word. It's like in so many environments, even when it is standalone restaurants, it's like, you still answer to landlords, you still answer to management companies of buildings, et cetera. But, you're used to those relationships. Whereas with Revival, you're kind of answering to and following guidelines of preferences of the operators of the hall. So, if they say stay open till 10 o'clock, you're staying open till 10 o'clock, right? And so you have to be a little bit more aware of all of the considerations of every vendor of the hall and think about decisions more communally.
Sure. And how many years were between the Randolph and Revival? Were there a couple of years that you were kind of getting your feet
just
on the
over
ground?
2. Mm-hmm.
2 years, okay. So Zach, you come riding in. Is this your moment?
You were about to introduce myself into the picture, exactly. Well, I was in the picture. Okay. Donna just didn't know about it. I was a customer.
You were hovering around the edge.
I was a dedicated customer to the original Randolph. I used to work in consulting here in the Loop, and we used to have some late nights and order in Brown Bag when they had just the location, the first one up on Randolph, which I thought was awesome. And then they opened Revival, which was 1 block from my office. So that became somewhere to go more often for dinner. And at the time, backing up, right? So I had just always been interested in fast casual, at least for a while. No real experience in consulting. We had done a couple of restaurant projects, and I thought that those were always the most interesting. I continue to think that fast casual is like the most interesting segment in restaurants, and that restaurants are one of the most interesting segments in general business. And so fortunately my company, which was I was going my 3rd year there, and so they let me do an externship, which was effectively 4 months. Go do whatever you want, come back and see how it went.
Wow.
It sounds better than it is. A lot of people, I think, go off and realize, okay, never mind, the real world is not as fun. Whereas I went off and put on a bandana and worked behind the cash register and did a bunch of food cost analyses and whatnot, and was like, yep, I want to do this.
Wow.
And so that was really the trial period. That was in January of 2017.
So did you just approach Donna and say, I think I can help you
I
with
wish
this?
I could.
Yeah.
She wasn't at the stall when I went over there. And so I approached their general manager at the time, a guy named Mike, and he was fortunate enough to pass along the general inbox email, which I could have gotten on the website, but nonetheless, and shot that a note. And unfortunately, at the time, that's what happens with small companies. The founders read the general inbox
at 11 o'clock at night in their bed, and they're like, huh.
Trust me, I've learned that with when we try to invite people to events and stuff. It's always an interesting process. Like half of them respond to you immediately. Half of them you never hear from them again.
Right.
So thank you to be the one in the half that responds to them immediately.
I'd like to think I would have given it another try had I not gotten it. She can't be that hard to find. There were 2 locations, and
Donna, what was your reaction to somebody wanting to help you with the business? I imagine there's a part of you that's like, dude, this is my concept, back off, I think I can handle it. Or was there a part of you that's like, oh God, yes, please come do this?
I just kind of wanted to see the man behind the email, right? It's like there's curiosity. And so when Zach and I actually met, because you don't really know what to think of an email like this. And when Zach and I actually met, we were in Revival downstairs, and he's like one of the most prepared, precise people that I've ever met, thank God. And he comes to this meeting with his thoughts about what he would like to do and what he would like to accomplish. And it was just I mean, not just polished, but it was also so cool to see someone who was thinking about all the things that you're struggling with, and, you know, how he knew we were struggling with one thing or another and needed to do a deep dive into food cost or needed to do XYZ. You know, maybe he could have just looked at me and guessed that I wasn't good at all that stuff, but he does really take on all the things that I'm not very good at, and had an outline of his thoughts on what he wanted to tackle, and it was great. And so us working together for the next 4 months was really awesome. And then, you know, once we got through the meat of that project, we could get on to all the other things that would affect Brown Bag in the long run.
Sure. So Zach, you're Chief Strategy Officer. Give me an idea of what that means. What are you sort of trying to do for Brown Bag?
Since that title is meaningless, right? Right. I mean, but that's kind of the idea, right? I thought that Brown Bag would be an awesome place to partner up with, and Donna would be an awesome person to partner up with, given that the concept seemed like it had traction, like it had a real ability to scale, and that it was one that I could truly get behind as a guest of the place and want to see this become a larger, you know, concept, basically. And so I think in large part, it's just a question of saying, okay, what are all the things that go on the checklist of capabilities that we need to have in order to do that? And really, my job just has become over time all the things that, you know, Donna herself is not as able to check off, just like she, you know, took the concept from founding to where it was with all the things that I couldn't have done.
Sure.
And so at this point, you know, that list is extremely long. And we don't check every box. I mean, it's kind of impossible to, or at least we can outsource certain things. But I think that in the scheme of, you know, trying to optimize for success of the concept, it's good when you can check more boxes. And so that's effectively what we do. We wear a ton of different hats. And for me, you know, that means, you know, finance certainly, and it means growth strategy certainly, and real estate selection and funding. But it also, you know, we just have, we can't get ourselves into a room, and you went to the bathroom and you come back a minute later and we're talking about, you know, who on the night team needs work at Brown Bag Randolph, right? It's at the end of the day, I think that in large part what we both are to each other is just another voice in the room who is fully up to speed on everything, and we can bounce ideas off of and make better decisions as a result of that.
Sure, yeah, you can support each other, complement each other's skills, and help each other's weaknesses, and it seems like you can kind of give an engine now to this concept that you've done such a great job of creating. Was that then sort of the impetus for the next stage of growth, or did it take another little bit of time after Revival before you could continue that growth?
It took some time, but we were actually already signed on our third lease when Zach came on board. Isn't that right?
I think so, yeah. Or you're about to be. It was pretty deep into the negotiation.
Yeah. So, you know, the plan was to grow, but certainly having Zach on board just accelerates the process. And like you said, we have these features that really do complement each other, so makes it all happen.
But, you know, at the same time, there's just so much patience that also needed to be involved at that time too, right? I mean, especially in this space, everything has so much lead time. And if it doesn't, you're either exceptionally lucky if you nail it without that lead time, or you are probably making a mistake.
Right.
And so for us, I think so much of what, when we started working together, the idea was to really create a strong foundation to then grow off of. And so it wasn't like 4 months in, great, I'm on the team, let's go open 10 stores. No, it's much more, okay, let's actually do whatever all the things we need to do are over the next year or two in order to then get us into a position where we can successfully, scalably grow, you know, in that way. So that's kind of finally now where we feel like we're getting to.
Yeah.
But, you know, patience is important, because I think if we had tried any faster, the same way that if Donna had tried to open 2 or 3 more locations on the heels of number 1, we could have run ourselves into the ground right then.
Right.
So
let's talk a little bit about sort of the landscape within which you were operating in the early days and now as well. The fast casual market in general, but particularly the fast casual market here in Chicago. Chicago strikes me as, well, it's one of those cities, sort of like Philadelphia. It's like fiercely loyal to its local independent restaurant brands. I know a lot of companies that come into to Chicago sort of struggle to find that same foothold, because I think this area very much supports local businesses. But there is a lot of competition in this city too, especially in the fast casual market. So how did you feel things were going in the early days as it relates to just the general market? Was it fierce competition? Were you constantly fighting to kind of get your voice heard above the pack? Or did you find that Chicagoans just embraced you immediately and you didn't have to do as much of that?
It's funny because I think that Chicagoans, while they are loyal, they don't necessarily always do the deep digging to find out who's behind what. So I actually think that in my particular case, brown bag as a concept spoke for itself. It was differentiated in that way that it's like, well, where else am I going to find a piece of fresh fish, in a couple minutes and it'd be high quality, right? So I think that initial reaction to the concept was, number one, we had real estate where it's a little bit of a food desert at the time over there. Maggie Daly Park hadn't been developed yet. And the people who are in these, very dense office buildings didn't have all that many options. And if they did, they were kind of tired.
Yeah.
And so, it was, I didn't feel a extreme sense of competition in that small area at the time. But, of course, I felt a strong sense of competition in how to be relevant as a concept in the context of all the other fast casuals that were being developed, as well as the national players that I knew from kind of studying and knowing my Noodles and Company days.
Gotcha. And has that sort of environment continue to today? I mean, the market today has evolved even in the last just year or two. Arguably fast casual is going through some turbulent times. It's sort of a winnowing of the field, I guess you could say. Some of the weaker players are, closing shops, or there's consolidation, mergers, things going on. Have you guys seen that here in Chicago? I mean, have you experienced that sort of I don't want to call it instability, because I think fast casuals does still have momentum, but it is almost just an oversupply, to the demand that is there. Have you guys experienced that at all firsthand?
I mean, we see it for sure in the market, right? I mean, we can point out examples of other concepts that have gone through that. Mm-hmm. For us, internally, I think it's so tough to break out, when you look at a month of sales, what would we have done had this store not opened nearby us? Or what do we think about whether the demand is outpacing supply or vice versa in that very specific trade area? Mm. For us, those decisions those micro drivers are hard to identify. Yeah. And it's more just, do we feel like we are growing? Do we feel like we are, more profitable than we were at the same time last year? And if we don't have that for a given month, can we figure out what we think the main things are and what are actually controllable, right? It's one thing to say, well, our sales slipped a little bit versus last year at this location, but hey, there's 3 new fast casual guys that opened up within the block. And so that makes sense. But at the same time, well, okay, let's not just state that passively. Let's figure out how we're going to now improve our offering there, our value proposition, or do whatever it takes to then go and beat it. So sure. It's definitely more competitive. I mean, there's no doubt that the supply is up. Mm-hmm. I do think demand is up too. I think fast casual continues to take from other areas of the restaurant world. And hopefully, as long as the economy stays okay, it also remains, interesting to people to eat out. But there's no doubt that it's more competitive.
Sure.
For us, I think it's also exciting.
And you guys also have carved out a pretty unique niche within fast casual, being fresh seafood. Let's go back to when you developed this concept. Why seafood? Why was that the idea originally, and something you thought could work in a fast casual model, particularly here in Chicago?
I mean, it's honestly as simple as that's the way that I preferred to eat, and I couldn't find it. That's pretty much it. Yeah. And nobody else was doing it.
Yeah.
And, I think that Chicagoans, while they are kind of meat and potatoes type of town, and very much value oriented. There are quite a number of people who have become more health conscious and more just concerned with what they're putting in their body over time. And when you can find those areas of the city where you have clusters of people who behave that way, it can be really a great marriage.
Mm-hmm. Now, Chicago is not totally known for its seafood. It's, like you said, it's really considered sort of a steakhouse city, right?
Yep.
Was there a learning curve for people? I mean, did you have to, everybody knows what seafood is, of course, but did you have to build a seafood culture, I guess, in Chicago?
That's a good question. I don't feel like I did have to build a seafood culture. I think that people, again, it goes into just like lean proteins, right? And so how are people thinking about health? And I think that if we can build in, I think that as I started, if we can build in fish one time a week into somebody's diet who's not otherwise eating fish, that's great. And then, I think that over the years, a lot of people have transitioned out of meat and prefer seafood. So
sure.
Yeah.
I imagine, though, you also have some unique supply chain concerns and hurdles you have to jump through to get that fresh seafood here to Chicago, at least as opposed to if you did do, a burger concept or something like that. How did you create the supply chain for Brown Bag? What did that look like, in order to get that fresh seafood offering here?
We are very lucky to have had two great, very well-known and reputable suppliers out of the gate, and so having the ability to place a seafood order up to midnight the day before for a delivery at 10 a.m. and you can say, hey, I need 80 pounds of X and 60 pounds of Y, and that they can actually process it and get it to your door is pretty amazing. But as I started the business, I think I hadn't had an anticipation of how much processing we would have to do. So, our kitchens are small, our walk-ins are small, and there is constantly activity. It's like going in the front door, there's fish boxes coming in and trucks coming in, and it's constantly breaking it down, turning it into prepped product, going onto the line, and it's just somewhat nonstop because of the size of our kitchens and because we're not holding product very long, and nor would we want to. So it turned out to be a great learning lesson that the small real estate was actually helpful in turning fresh product.
That's a good point. And then you guys do so much seasonal menu innovation, and you're constantly kind of bringing in new fish and stuff. Was that easy to accomplish through your supply chain, through your vendors?
It's funny, I went to a wedding this week, and I was talking to somebody about this, and there was a time at Brown Bag where, granted, I was in the kitchen and in the restaurant every single day, and we were doing a daily special.
Oh, wow.
I remember that.
Which is just hilarious.
It's incredible.
like an involved daily special.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. That's when it feels more like you're running a independent full service restaurant, not a fast casual concept, right? And so those days are long gone. But as far as the supplier piece, they're very responsive, and especially when you have reps who will tell you, hey, I have fresh XYZ, and you have very direct relationships with them, it's pretty great. Obviously now we're purchasing on far more scale and think about these things in advance and do LTOs instead of Donna special for the day, but
not even Donna special. It'd be like,
yes,
someone's got an idea.
Anybody? Put fish on bread? Okay, let's call it a day.
Yep.
Were you the one who was handling menu innovation from day one?
Yep.
And are you still?
Yeah. I look at it as a much more collaborative effort. We do fun things in the company, like when we think about our seasonal special, we do like a challenge that's an internal memo that goes out to every dishwasher, every line cook, every manager who it's like, hey, if you guys want to bring something to the table, we're going to taste around and see what everybody's ideas are. And it really does help. I mean, not only people feel like they have a part of something bigger, but it's also, I'm not going to always come up with the best idea, and I'm not going to always make it the best. And just to have that collaborative approach has turned out to be really effective for us.
Menu innovation via the democratic process. Yeah. How has the menu innovation changed over the years? I mean, have you found that tastes have changed? Do you feel influenced by trends going on in the general market?
Yeah. We have... it was always a healthy concept out of the gate, but we've shifted to be even more veggie forward. We have 5 bases, or we originally had 5 bases. Is that right?
You originally had 5. We now have 6.
Yeah. So we added the Veggie Box into the mix, and so the Veggie Box is a blend of sautéed green vegetables of kale, spinach, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, and green beans.
And this is why you have Zach around.
Yeah, exactly.
Green beans. Yeah.
Green beans.
I'll take Veggie Box for 400.
So we added that into the mix, and we've just our regulars, that's what they come back for, not just the Veggie Box, but for the healthy options. They come back for salads, they come for Veggie Box, they come for Power Box, and then you have the people who are maybe tourists, or the Friday crew that's doing lobster rolls or fish and chips or something. But those repeat diners, I think that we needed to do some menu innovation to make sure that they were taken care of, thinking of things, and it was staying fresh. And we do seasonal specials now rather than daily.
Yeah. Talking about the health piece of this, did you find that you were maybe cornered into being a healthy fast casual, and was that something you wanted to embrace? I mean, everybody sort of looks at seafood as being a healthier option, of course, but was that the image you wanted, or did you want it just to be seafood and let that sort of stand on its own?
I mean, I skew healthy, so I think that I did intend for it to be that way, but I think that the way that people have received it is even more support in that direction than I had anticipated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there going to be a plant-based seafood option out there someday? You guys watching that space?
Will there be? I'm sure there will be. There'll be a plant-based everything option.
Yeah.
But I think the good news with seafood, and there will be people who disagree or who have different behaviors than what I'm about to say, but I think in general, seafood is, especially how we source it, a much more sustainable product. And I hope that, in that way, people can look at seafood as already a great alternative to other meat or protein products that aren't as sustainable or aren't, who kind of more so need the plant-based earlier on, right?
Yeah.
We've seen that trend go. I'm not saying it won't happen with seafood, but I think that, sustainability has always been so pivotal to this brand and something that we literally talk about on a day-to-day basis when it comes to seafood.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if the value add in bringing in a plant-based seafood product is as high for us as it would be for some kind of beef or pork or chicken or any other meat protein option.
And I guess that would only be relevant to a vegetarian or vegan consumer, because do people really feel like they have to have a plant-based seafood option to be healthier if they aren't already a vegetarian?
Totally.
I mean, it is a healthy protein already.
Right. For us, our veto vote menu item is chicken, right? We have chicken on the menu so that people who don't like seafood can already, cannot direct their group other ways for lunch. But to have a plant-based seafood, I'm not sure if that would get a lot of people to say, okay, fine, I'll go to brown bag then, since I can get my
It's an interesting
salmon.
point about the veto vote, though, too. When you think about seafood, particularly as it relates to fast food, there's Captain D's, there's Long John Silver's, not a whole lot of traction in the space, but also, it comes with its own perception. I mean, I think people have an idea of what those brands are. Did you guys ever fight that? I mean, do people think, oh, it's counter service seafood, it must be deep fried shrimp or something?
No, we didn't. And I think that that's mostly just because of coming out of the gate with a premium fast casual identity. That was important to me, and it's important to me that when people walk in that they feel like they're not in one of those places. And I think
if anything, the where people can get a little bit more needing of that education may be the other way around, where they might see a brown bag seafood and naturally assume that's a place where I'm going to sit down and have a $25 piece of fish. There's nothing about the name brown. I mean, that's actually part of the name brown bag, right? That is supposed to suggest an experience that's not like that.
Right.
But nonetheless, people are going to assume certain things when they hear seafood company or anything like that. And so I think that is, especially in the downtown environment, we don't have a ton of those, more typical QSR fast food fish brands here. So we do have nicer seafood restaurants, and so I think that's a little bit more of the education that people go through.
Gotcha. So you guys just opened your 5th location. All of these stores are within 3 or 4 mile radius, right? They're all fairly close. How does that work out for you? I mean, are you cannibalizing your sales to any, or is there enough business to go around that you can support 5 restaurants within this kind of small radius?
We certainly think so.
Yeah.
I mean, fortunately, we have a lot of brands that are here in Chicago that are ahead of us, in their learning curve, who we can look at and say, okay, how many locations does this concept or that concept that started 5 or 10 years before us have? Mm-hmm. And for that matter, we talk to them, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the best thing about this industry, is that everyone is generally very helpful and open, and we love to give advice to people the same way that they give advice to us. So when we look at other brands that have fit 10 or 12 in the space or in the downtown area, and who have a similar enough concept to us as far as their price point, as far as their customer base, things like that, it gives us certainly a lot more confidence around what we can do and how we can not cannibalize ourselves.
Sure.
But it is coming to the point, right? But I mean, as you scale, it does mean that different areas of the city get crossed off, because you literally can't put a location, a block from your current location or anything like that. Right. And so it does become a more selective real estate process as it has to.
Yeah. What makes the perfect brown bag location? I mean, is there a model that you guys are trying to follow in terms of what's the best real estate, what's the best kind of footprint?
As far as footprint goes, we've started to prefer a little bit smaller. And then I think that is, there's a number of reasons to it. Obviously, it's less expensive, but there is also this element that's, as we start doing lots of delivery and lots of takeout, it's like you want to make sure that the restaurants that you have and the real estate that you have is being used, right? And so there's nothing worse than looking into a restaurant that doesn't seem full. And so initially we were talking about how that processing piece too, it's like if you keep it tight, it stays fresh, it looks full, and if you can churn people through it, then it's good for us. From a customer standpoint, right, we really look for high density areas. We do very, very well in high volume because of again, that throughput of what we do. We want to make sure that people aren't experiencing a wait where they're waiting for a piece of salmon to be cooked from start to finish. We want it to be anticipated. And so if we put 20 pieces of salmon down on the grill and know that they're going to be picked up in the next 5 minutes, then that person has a 2-minute ticket time, and it's a lot more convenient for them. And then that's part of the value of coming to Brown Bag. So that's how we see some of the downtown real estate, whereas we do have one on the north side that has a much different kind of family vibe. They do a ton of takeout also, but the environment is sunny and patio and strollers and the whole thing. So it's nice to be able to flex into those neighborhoods and flex the identity of the brand a bit.
Yeah. Of course, this leads into the conversation on the rise in off-premises dining and third-party delivery and all of that stuff. When you founded Brown Bag, did you always envision it as being more of a dine-in concept? Did you care? Or, was it just something where you would embrace however people wanted to experience the brand?
I think that, yeah. It's like I really didn't know, but I knew that we were creating an environment that I had spent a lot of time and energy, from a design standpoint and from a feel standpoint creating. And so I wanted people to dine in because I think that it's so essential that guests touch the brand and that they walk in and then they see what we stand for, no matter if that's communicated through, in our case, we don't put values on a wall, but, there are some concepts that are very explicit with that sort of thing, or, if it's using reclaimed wood for something and that suggests sustainability to them. I think that those pieces are really, really important to every brand. And so, to your point, the rise of these digital and cloud-based and people not being able to touch your brand anymore, or preferring to stay in their home and get the food, it's tough to communicate the brand to people who have never walked in the door.
Yeah. Did you see any of this coming? Because, I mean, you're still a fairly young brand, so I imagine that when you first opened the doors, there must have been some inkling that some of this was coming. Could you have prepared for what's going on now?
Maybe if Zach was on board, I would have seen it.
Let's not remember,
Zach.
you were on Caviar.
Oh, okay.
You were on Caviar back in 2014.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's true. So I suppose I saw it to some degree. I saw it,
yeah.
and I did make an investment and of both time and money into our website, which is an online ordering platform in itself that's proprietary, right? So that we. I don't know if the vision at the time was so that we weren't participating in third-party services, but it was certainly so that we could create some type of stronghold as that part of the industry and tech and food was kind of shaking itself out, and that did work, really well.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that only in the last maybe year or so has third-party taken off in Chicago here to a level where it is one of the first, 3 talking points of a fast casual restaurant.
Right.
And so I think Donna was exactly right, where the investment that she made brilliantly at the time was in our own website, which was able to be a first mover generally in fast casual here in Chicago, as far as being able to order online, especially for smaller concepts, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was something that maybe was a built-out capability for a Chipotle, but not for a lot of the more one-off guys at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was ahead of its time by a couple of years and gave us a huge leg up where we have plenty of dedicated, orders through our website where we can much better communicate the brand, much better, obviously, from a financial side as well. And then I think the same thing is fairly true about third party. We can talk about how it's hard to communicate the brand, but we've made a ton of investment in that communication piece on the packaging side, on the branding side, on the marketing side of things that we can try to install touch points, even though people are not interfacing with Brown Bag really whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, on the operations and tech side within the restaurant, because that's the bigger challenge, I think. Finance is finance, right? You have these commissions, and that is something that's hard to swallow, and but there isn't a ton that you can do with it.
Yeah.
But the operations and tech piece is a huge spectrum as far as how you handle that. What
Sure.
do you do when your tablet starts dinging, right? And I think that's where we were, I'd like to think, earlier to that thought process and made key investments early on there to effectively make it such that we can be profitable with third parties and can improve the guest experience both online or for the third parties as well as in store, even as theoretically tablets are dinging and we don't hear them ding, fortunately. That's part of the tech piece.
Mute it, man.
No, right, exactly. But I think that, to your question, right, I mean, even though it has been a little bit hard to predict just how high these have risen, and for that matter, who knows how far they'll continue to rise. I think that we both feel pretty good about where we are at right now, operationally and from a customer standpoint on those platforms, and hopefully, or I think a large part of that is just because of when that investment was made and thought through versus when it's gotten to be as large as it has.
You just said profitable with third-party services. I think everybody wants to know how you can be profitable with all these services. People are frustrated with how much they're taking off the top.
For sure.
So what's your secret sauce? How do you make this work for your brand?
I mean, truly, it's about labor, right? I think that a very simple model to it says your food cost is your food cost, largely, and the commissions are a known fact. So, and all your fixed costs are, they're still there in the business. So I think where people ride the spectrum of going from profitable on third party to unprofitable on third party is how they can manage the labor piece and how scalable or not the labor is versus the third party sales. Theoretically, right? Just if you can churn out, $1,000, I'm making it up, of Uber Eats sales without adding one staff member, you would take that.
Yeah.
But if you need to add 2 crew members to the line to handle that demand, you might start to do some different math. And so for us, that's basically been the secret sauce, is figuring out how, what moves to make in that game to manage labor better.
Sure.
And I think the only other thing that is worth thinking about that I kind of brought up before is the notion of whether third party is negatively impacting your in-store experience.
Right.
Because that's one where it happens. I mean, it happens to us. It happens to other brands. It's happened to me as a customer. The key is minimizing it in a big way, right? Because that is where you'll really not even realize that you're shooting yourself in the foot and do so, because you'll think, okay, I've got this all under control and we're managing our third party fine. But suddenly if your ticket times for in-store experiences are up by even 2 minutes, how many of those guests are not coming back, or how many of them are frustrated, or how many of them are having negative experiences.
Right.
And that's where you start to materially impact your business on a long-term basis, not just on a week-to-week basis.
I think it's really interesting. I mean, there's so much about control here that you lose so much control working with a lot of these services too. And you guys, you've very carefully created a brand that you would like to control. How do you do that with all of these third-party services? How do you maintain control of the brand and make sure that the brown bag experience is holds up for all of these variety of services that you partner with?
I'm like, oh my God, there's so many little ways, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, I think that when we're working with those services, it's like we treat them like the ticket is treated entirely differently than an in-store ticket. It just needs to flow into our system as if it's an in-store ticket. And so, I guess the food quality piece obviously comes first, and so we took a look at our menu and thought about, okay, what actually doesn't travel well? We spend time testing those things and looking at them, and we had a format on the menu at one point called Straight Up that was just for a lean protein eater who just wanted the protein straight up. So if you wanted the Daily Catch straight up with nothing else but a lemon slice, that's exactly what you got. But that doesn't travel well, right? Because it's not surrounded by anything. There's no, like a Power Box, there's ancient grain blend that's warm, that's holding that fish. With the Veggie Box, there's vegetables. With other items, there's kind of some insulation there. And then just to have that protein by itself was like, okay, this actually isn't a great menu item in this format for delivery. And because we also do so much to go, even if people are just ordering at the counter, we pulled that format. People can still order it, of course, but it's like that wasn't working well for us. So there was some look at food quality, traveling, and then a lot of time spent looking at packaging, and which is still, a constant evolution to get that right. But ultimately that's what the end user is looking at. So there's that, and then I don't know. There's
just some differentiation as far as the materials that go in the bag as well, right? I mean, someone who's ordering on Uber Eats is not just finding Uber Eats for the first time and then never ordering Uber Eats again. They probably are someone who's ordering on Uber Eats a couple times a week. Yeah. And so for us, we thought about it as it's a given that we have to make sure our food is excellent, and we have to make sure that it gets there hot, and that's all table stakes. But how can we make their experience actually a little bit differentiated on Uber Eats, just like their experience if they walked into a brown bag store, we would feel would be differentiated than walking into another fast casual concept. And so we've experimented with different things as far as what we can include, whether it's we've put a placemat in the bag that's branded. We've put a postcard in the bag that has some of our brand values on it and our sustainability initiatives. We've tried different things like that, and it's kind of a work in process now as far as getting to a spot in packaging where we're kind of evolving that even one step further.
Right.
But we get feedback all the time on those platforms that people are wowed, right? It's that extra, we kind of think of it as like the 5th star or the 10 out of 10 experience. It's how do we make that experience of ordering Uber Eats, or Grubhub or whoever it is, feel a little bit different and feel a little bit special, because that's really what people feel when they walk in. And so, you can have a great experience with just great food, but if we can get that little extra, special star, that is what we were trying to work on.
Maybe you guys have already answered this, but what keeps you up at night? I mean, what are the challenges today that are sort of the stiffest headwinds for the brown bag business?
They're different for both of us, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure
They're tied, I'm sure, but they're different for both of us.
I think at this stage of where we are, there's this, we're at a fun point, right? And what I mean by that is we've talked a lot about in the last hour or so the slow, patient growth. And we've also talked about the notion of wanting to accelerate that growth. And I think that where we are at right now is starting to move up that hockey stick. And at some point you get a few years down the road and you are, ideally, if we're doing well, we're opening many stores a year and you're up on that curve and you're flying. But where we're coming from is very much a one store per year, sustainable, calm, patient type of growth model. And so I think that in my, at least in my day-to-day, thinking about how to get that accelerating part of the curve, and what that means from a standpoint of real estate strategy and funding strategy and making choices about effectively growth and pace versus patience and willingness to pass on things is where it's tough. It's like it ends up that we have a lot of decisions to make on truly a week-to-week basis that go into that. And I think that what keeps me up at night are especially the hard ones on that, where it's, man, that is a great spot and it would help us grow and it would increase our brand, but this is how much it costs, and we're still at a spot where one bad move can have a really, really significant impact on the business. And so, but that's also, the same thing that keeps me up at night is why, it's enjoyable to think about, right? This is why I wanted to be part of this, right? No offense to how we started off, but the idea wasn't just to throw food costs on a bunch of menu items and increase the price of one or two of them or decrease the price on another one. It's to figure out how to make brown bag a national category leader in what we're doing. So it's these kind of decisions that are the fun ones, and that I think if we make them right, and we think about them all the time together, that will get us where we're trying to go. But get them wrong, and we're at a spot where we don't have a lot of no one, I don't think, in this space has a ton of wiggle room, but certainly the smaller you are, the more you want to be careful about those decisions.
For sure.
My up at night is probably more of like a founder's passion piece. Like, how do you communicate as you grow, and start to let go of some of the things and be confident that they're in place? And it's like, if Zach represents essentially growth and strategy and all those decisions that are exciting and amazing, and thinking about scale, there's also this piece of me that came from the days of doing Donna's special for the day. And there's a lot of joy for me on both sides. And there's a lot of joy in knowing every team member in every one of our restaurants and being able to joke around with them and be on the line with them and be a real human element in their day-to-day. That makes me very, very happy. And not losing that and not losing that energy as we grow, because there are so many more people to touch and so many more people to impact. And I find myself spending more time with our managers and leadership than I do necessarily like side by side with our crew. And I love all of it. So it's a little bit of just like being pulled in a lot of directions as we grow.
Sure. Those are both really good answers. You guys have thought about this a lot, I think.
We don't get a lot of sleep when we're thinking about these
keeping up at night. So I know you guys are interested in expanding outside of Chicago, and I know that growth is on your mind a lot. What do you guys think about like how that growth is going to go? What do you hope to accomplish with this brand, I guess?
I think Zach nailed it. It's like we want to be the category leader. This is a very unique category. It's one that we really believe in, and one that we see a lot of growth in. And so we want to own that spot.
Yeah, there is no we would feel that there is no category leader in what we're doing. And there are definitely other brands who probably have the same aspiration. We know some of them quite well, and they're good concepts as well. But for us, the goal when we think about these things and why they keep us up at night is thinking about how to balance, A, maybe advancing that kind of category leadership, and then B, making sure that you don't get too far ahead of yourself when you're trying to do it, because that'll make you not a category leader real quick.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of how we think about growth, is on that spectrum.
Sure. Last question for you guys. Donna, let's start with you. I'll ask it for both of you, but when you started this business, looking back to then and what you knew then, what you hoped to accomplish, now fast forward to today, knowing what you know now, what is your advice to the Donna back then? What is your advice to young entrepreneurs who want to get into this business?
I've been asked this question before, right? And this one sounds a little bit more holistic, but I do think that there is, the advice to be thoughtful about what you're doing and patient about what you're doing, and, get the right people in place, and, to expect that you're going to be married to your business for a very long time. All that stuff is true. But I think that a specific piece of advice that I have is open in the right season. I think that we could have had a very different trajectory had we not opened in May, and I don't know how intentional it was for me at the time and if it was just the way that construction fell, but to have that, in Chicago, right, summer is big season. People are out, they're out of hibernation, they're happy to be out, and to launch in a season where people were very excited and kind of knocking down the door, and to feel that effect and really have your concept be well received because of that seasonality and the vision of the whole piece coming together. You have to be thoughtful about that, because we all go through ebbs and flows of business, and had we opened in October, who knows what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Zach, same for you, and thinking about when you joined this brand and what you knew about it then coming to today.
It came to my mind pretty quickly, which is the advice I would give is to take advice. Meaning, I come from, like I said, a consulting background. One thing that shocked me about the restaurant space, once I was waist deep in it, is just how willing everyone is to actually collaborate and talk about things openly with people and help each other. And I think that too often entrepreneurs or people who have their new concepts can get a little bit wary of that, or maybe they just don't know how much other operators are willing to help them. And I just think that there's so much value to be had in learning from people who have been there and done that, and not just talking to them, but truly taking what they're saying and thinking about how it affects your idea, your business. For us, we do the same thing with lots of other brands who were in our shoes 5 or 10 years ago. We have so many people who we rely on in the space who we can just ask those kind of tough questions to, and they've said, yeah, oh, for sure, we were there. It comes to mind so quickly.
Yeah.
And I think that with someone starting a new concept, it can be a great concept. There's still just so much that you can learn from talking to other operators who are going to be helpful and willing to talk. And that's really what I'd recommend. I think that if I was trying to do that right now, and I've been here for 3 years, I still would feel the need to go talk to 100 different people to get those perspectives. And that's with a background in the space at this point. So that would be my piece, is just take advice and listen. So a lot of people know what they're doing a little bit, from a lot of different angles that can help your business.
That's right. Well, Donna, Zach, really appreciate your time today. Thanks for sitting down.
Thank you.
There you have it. That's my conversation with Donna Lee and Zach Flanzman, the partners behind Brown Bag Seafood Company. Of course, as always, you can go to qsrmagazine.com for all the news and insights you need on the QSR and fast casual restaurant industries. Go to qsrmagazine.com/podcast to access the entire archive of Fast Forward. Go subscribe on the apps wherever you're listening to this, and send your feedback. Either rate the show on the app or just email me your feedback at sam@qsrmagazine.com. That's it for today's episode. We'll talk to you again next time.